Hello grade 3, how are you? Inshallah, in this video we are going to talk about dissolving. By the end of this video or this session we should be able to know what is dissolving, what is soluble and insoluble, what is solute and what is solvent, and what is solution. As we took this session in the science lab using this investigation sheet, we said that dissolving means when a solid or liquid vanish or disappear in another liquid, like for example sugar in water, it just dissolve, vanish and disappear. Salt in water, it just dissolve, and so on. When the solid dissolve or disappear in the liquid, we call this solid, we give it the name of soluble solid or soluble solute. The solid which we put it in the liquid to dissolve, we call it solute, the solid. Like for example, we have here in our experiment salt solute, sugar solute, sand solute, charcoal solute, oil, rice, flour, and soil. Different kinds of solutes. We are going to put them in water, which we are going to call it its solvent, as we are going to try to dissolve it in this substance which is water, its solvent. So the solid is solute, and the water which is going to dissolve this solid or this solute, we call it solvent. When we mix them together and the solute dissolve in the solvent, or for example the salt dissolve in water, we call this mixture solution. Okay, you can bring those solutes now: salt, sugar, sand, charcoal, oil, rice, flour, and soil. Those different solutes, not all of them, the one that's available for you. And solvent, water. We are going to use water solvent. Pause the video and go to bring your ingredients to make the experiment with me. Then add salt, 1 teaspoon of salt to a cup of water, salt solute to a cup of water solvent, and try to stir it, mix it. Salt will completely dissolve in water, will vanish, will disappear. That means salt is soluble in water. It just dissolve, give us a soluble solution. The mixture of solute and solvent, when the solute disappear or vanish or soluble in the solvent, we call the mixture solution. So now we have soluble salt solution. Our solvent here was water, and the mixture is soluble. Let's make it bigger. Soluble salt solution. Soluble salt solution. Okay, sugar solute, we are going to use water solvent. You will find it soluble sugar solution. Soluble sugar solution. But what about sand? Sand solute, we use water solvent, and we will got insoluble mixture. Insoluble mixture. We can't call this a solution, as the solute do not completely dissolve in the solvent, as the solute do not dissolve, sand do not dissolve in the solvent which is water. So we cannot call it solution, it's just mixture, insoluble mixture. But any kind of solute that dissolve in the solvent, we give it the name of solution. We have different factors or different things that affect the dissolving. We can try temperature. If we use hot water, What will happen to dissolving? When we test that in lab, we found out that the hotter the water, the faster the dissolving. When we use hot water, the dissolving was really fast than the cold one. Okay, let's test the amount of solute. Add more solute. The more the solute, the slower the dissolving. The more the solute, as we add more salt to the water, the dissolving will become slower. And our conclusion is gonna be the fewer the solute, the faster the dissolving, or the more the solute, the slower the dissolving. Another factor is stirring. The faster the stirring, as we stir our solution very fast, stir our solute fast in the solvent, the dissolving will become faster. So our conclusion is going to be the faster the stirring, the faster the dissolving. Our last factor, or our last thing that can affect our dissolving, is the amount of solvent, the amount of water in our experiment here. If we bring 2 cups, 1 cup contain 200 ml of water, or let's say half cup of water and 1 full cup of water, and we add 1 teaspoon of solute in the half cup and 1 teaspoon of solute, let's say salt, in the full cup. Which one will dissolve faster? Of course, the one which contain more water, the one which have more water, because the more the higher the amount of solvent, the faster the dissolving. If we use large amount of solvent or high amount of solvent or high amount of water, the dissolving will become faster. So our conclusion is going to be the higher the amount of solvent, the faster the dissolving. This is going to be our conclusion. As we use more solvent, the dissolving will become faster. Now let's move to another part, which is the video, and it will help us to know more what is solute, what is solvent, and how can we make a solution, and what's soluble and what's insoluble.
Solutes plus solvents make solutions. A solution is a mixture in which the particles of the mixed substances are so small that you can't see them, even under a microscope. The most familiar examples of solutions are solids dissolved in liquids. The 2 components are given special names. The substance that dissolves is called the solute, and the substance it dissolves into is called the solvent. For example, when you dissolve sugar in water, sugar is the solute and water is the solvent. We can also say that sugar is soluble in water because it dissolves easily. But sugar is insoluble in other liquids, such as oil. Water is a good solvent because it can dissolve a large variety of substances.
Exactly. As we see in our video, jelly can dissolve in water, so jelly is the solute while water is the solvent. Sugar dissolve in water, that's why we call it soluble in water. Sugar solute is soluble in water solvent, while sand cannot dissolve in water, that's why we call it insoluble. Let's play a game.
Welcome to Virtual Experiments.
Let's investigate dissolving.
Certain solids dissolve in water, but others do not. Let's see what happens when we try to dissolve salt. We stir the water to help the salt dissolve. The microzoom shows the salt particles dissolving into the water. The water and dissolved salt is called a solution. The salt can be separated from the solution by evaporation. We can do this by leaving some of the solution on a saucer to dry. When the solution dries, it leaves behind tiny salt crystals around the edge. Now let's try to dissolve sand. The sand doesn't dissolve, so no solution is formed. Instead, we get a mixture of sand and water. We can separate the mixture of sand and water by filtering it. The sand particles are bigger than the holes in the filter paper, so they are trapped by it.
That's exactly what we talked about. That if we try to dissolve salt in water, it will just vanish. It will just disappear, as salt solute is soluble in water solvent. If we want to separate them, we can just put this solution in warm place, so water will evaporate and we will have the salt crystals stay in the bottom of the plate or of our container. While sand do not dissolve in water, sand will not vanish or disappear in water. That's why we call sand insoluble. And if you want to separate this sand from the water, and we just call it mixture, not solution, as it's insoluble. We can just, if you want to separate them, we can just use a filter paper and try to pass these mixtures through the filter paper. Water will pass through the small opening of the filter paper, while sand, as it's big, will not pass and will stay in the filter paper as shown.
Can you guess which of these solids will dissolve? For each solid, click on the rollover barrel to decide and click Check. Then watch the experiment to see what happens.
We have different salts or different materials or different substance, and we are going to test them to see which one will dissolve in water and which will not. For example, let's start by the paint powder. What's your prediction? Will it dissolve or no? I'm sorry, let's start with salt. Will it dissolve or no? What's your prediction? My prediction is yes, salt will dissolve. Let's check.
That is correct. Well done.
Yes, it just
How do you
dissolved.
separate the solids from the mixture or solution? Click on
How
the
we
rollover
can
barrel
separate
to
them.
decide.
If the solid is soluble in the solvent, we can only separate it by evaporating the water, so we will get the solid in the bottom. Let's see. Filter or evaporate. I think it's evaporate, as salt is soluble in water.
That is correct. Well done.
Let's check the paint powder. Is it soluble or insoluble? What do you think? What's your prediction? Paint powder? Maybe yes. I don't know. Let's check. Oh,
That's
my
not correct.
prediction was wrong.
Here is the correct answer.
Paint powder this will not dissolve in water. It's insoluble. Okay, how do we separate the paint and water? It's insoluble. So will we use evaporation or filter? We said if it's soluble, we can use evaporation. What if it's insoluble? We can use filter, as filter will pass only water.
That is correct. Well done.
Let's see, flour. What do you think? Flour is soluble or insoluble? What's your prediction? Maybe no. I don't know. Let's do the experiment and check.
That is correct. Well done.
It's insoluble. How can we separate the insoluble solute from its solvent? Or how can we separate this mixture? I think it's filter. Now we know if it's insoluble, filter. If it's soluble, evaporation.
That is correct. Well done.
Alum. Dissolve or not? Dissolve or not? Maybe yes. I'm not sure. Let's check.
That is correct. Well done.
It dissolve. So how can we separate it? It dissolve, which means it's soluble. How can we separate it? Filter or evaporation? We said if it's soluble, so evaporation.
That is correct. Well done.
Sugar. Let's check sugar. I think it will dissolve. That's why we use it for all of our drinks.
That is correct. Well done.
So how can we separate the soluble solute from its solvent? Evaporation, as it's soluble.
That is correct. Well done.
Soil. Will it dissolve or not? Is it soluble or insoluble? Maybe no. Let's check.
That is correct. Well done.
It's insoluble. So how can we separate it? Maybe evaporation or filter. As it's insoluble, it must be filter.
That is correct. Well done.
Now let's move to some other.
Would you like to exit virtual
some
experiments?
Working sheets that we did in the class, or that we took it as a homework? Okay. Carols add some salt to a beaker of water. He also adds some sand to another beaker of water. Beaker mean cup. Complete these sentences about adding salt and sand to water. Choose the words below. We have condense, evaporate, dissolve, insoluble, soluble, solute, and solvent. Salt space in water to make solution. Salt space in water to make a solution. Dissolves, excellent. Salt dissolve in water to make a solution. Water is the in this process. Water is the space in this process. Water is the solvent in this process. Excellent. Salt is the space in the process. In the solution, I'm sorry. Salt is the space in the solution. Salt is the solute. Salt is the solute, whilst water is the solvent. D. When all water space from the salt solution, a white solid is left behind. When all water space from the salt solution, a white solid is left behind. Evaporate. When all water evaporates from the salt solution, a white solid is left behind. E. Sand doesn't make a solution when mixed with water because it's insoluble. As sand is insoluble, it will not make a solution, it will just make a mixture. Let's move to the next page. When a substance is mixed with water, it may dissolve. Complete the sentence about adding substances to water. Choose from the words insoluble, soluble, solution, residue, solute, and solvent. I told you that if I try to dissolve, residue means if solute do not dissolve in water, it stay either in the top of the base or the base of the solvent cup. We call that residue. Like for example, if I try to dissolve sand in water, sand will not dissolve, it will just stay in the bottom. We call this residue. A liquid that dissolves a solid. A liquid that dissolves a solid is called a solvent. Excellent. The liquid that we use to dissolve a solid, we call it solvent. A substance that do not dissolve in water is a substance that do not dissolve in water is insoluble. Excellent. A substance that dissolve in water is a substance that dissolve in water. Soluble. Excellent. A substance is dissolved in water. This substance is called a substance is dissolved in water. This substance is called the solute. Solute is a substance that dissolve in water, which is solvent. Solute. Excellent. The mixture of substance dissolved in water is called a mixture of substance that dissolve in water. Once they told you mixture and dissolved, so it must be a solution. Underline the correct word to complete the sentences. Salt is soluble or insoluble? Of course soluble. And dissolve in water to form a solution or solvent? To form a solution. When this is left in warm or hot place, the water condense or evaporate, and the liquid or solid salt is left behind. Solid salt is left behind. So the whole sentence must be: salt is soluble and dissolve in water to form solution. When this is left in a warm place, the water evaporate and the solid salt is left behind. Let's move to the next page. Petalina is making some soup using the ingredients shown: carrot, pepper, potato and salt. Which of the ingredients will dissolve in water? It's salt. When she has made the soup, it's too dilute, and I told you dilute means light. Like for example, if I give you 2 cups of lemon juice, one is very sugary and very dense and contains so much lemon, we call this concentrated, while the other one that do not contain much lemon and do not contain much sugar, it's just light, we call it dilute. Dilute if it's contained less solute, and if it contain more solute or a lot of solute, we call it concentrated. So when she has made the soup, it is too dilute. Why is this? Take the correct box. It means it contains too much salt? No, too much salt means concentrated. It contains not enough salt? Yes, this is right. It contains not enough salt, that's why it's very diluted. Very diluted. It contains too much water? Yes, maybe too much water. So, too much water or not enough salts, both of them are right. How can she make the soup more concentrated? We said if the solution is concentrated, it must contain too much solute. So if she want to make her soup more concentrated, she can add more salt. Some solid dissolve in water. Which 2 of these solid form a solution when they are mixed with water? Form a solution mean it must be soluble and it must dissolve. Sure, they are going to be salt and sugar, because sand is insoluble and sawdust is also insoluble. State the word that describe materials that do not dissolve in water. Materials that do not dissolve in water. Which word describe them? It's insoluble. Excellent. Insoluble. What is the correct answer to the teacher's question? Take the correct box. What is a solution? The water used for dissolving a solid. The water used for dissolving a solid. No, this is not a solution. This is the solvent. Solid which dissolve water. No, this is solute. A solid dissolved in water. A solid dissolved in water. Yes, This is a solution. A solid which does not dissolve in water is insoluble. So the answer is going to be the third box. The class investigates solution. 10 ml of water and the same mass of sugar is put into separate test tubes and the contents stirred until all the sugar had dissolved. Powdered sugar, sugar cubes, granulated sugar. And remember, test tube is a kind of containers that we use them in the lab, in the science lab. Those containers, we call them test tubes. Which sugar dissolved the quickest? Powdered sugar, sugar cubes, or granulated sugar? Sure, it's gonna be powdered sugar, because the smaller the particle of the solid, the faster the dissolving. 2. Other than stirring, what else could you do to speed up the dissolving of all the sugars? Other than stirring, concentrate and think. Squeeze your mind. It's gonna be using hot water. If we use hot water, dissolving will be faster than the cold one. Why was the same amount of water and the same mass of sugar added to each test tube? Why did we use the same amount of water and the same mass of sugar? To make our test fair. As you know, in the fair test, we must keep all of the things the same, but change only one variable, and the variable here in our experiment is the type of sugar. Thank you so much, year grade 3. I hope you understand the video, and don't hesitate to ask any question if you don't understand any part. Thank you so much. Bye bye.